7:38 p.m. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty. This is a special meeting from a continued hearing in June as it relates to the Osgood Solar application. We have excused absences tonight of Ms. McIntyre, right? Because it's a special meeting. Is there anybody else we're missing?
Denny.
And Denny Morgenthau. They're both excused tonight for the record. The meeting was called by me, and we do have two new associate members here, Ms. Jacobs, right, and Nathan, how are you? Nice to see you. You're both certified that you've reviewed the record from the last hearing, so you're eligible to vote for this hearing. Those documents are in the file. Mr. Rosen, we also have with us tonight, town council as well, who is here to observe. I don't believe he's taking any questions. So, with that being said, Attorney Rosen.
May I ask before we get to the presentation, is everybody here eligible to vote? It was my understanding that new members who weren't members at the time of the application and first hearing weren't going to be eligible for participation in voting. I may be wrong, but that was my understanding of things.
It's my understanding that the new members are eligible to vote because they effectively missed a meeting, but they were able to certify, like any one of us could certify, that they reviewed the record.
Okay.
So by reviewing the record, they can miss one time. And I know our staff has provided all the records to them. And so I believe they're eligible.
All right. The town council isn't taking questions, but...
Well, on that, yeah, if they have certified under 3923D, the things that they had to certify with regard to viewing and reviewing the prior proceedings, then in my opinion, they'd be eligible.
All right. Thank you very much. I heard a very different conclusion earlier today, but that's another time, another story. Thanks for clarifying, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, town council.
Could I ask one quick question on that note?
Sure.
If we do go to a vote this evening, do you determine at the beginning of the hearing which of the two additional members votes? Because it's 5 voting members, or do all 6 vote?
It's five voting members.
Okay. So do you determine now, if we had a vote tonight, who would be voting, or do you determine at the end?
I haven't, I guess I could determine now.
I just didn't want there to be a debate about it. I think
It's preferable
Okay.
for the meeting that you determine which you're going to vote.
Thank you, Tom.
Which you'll be eligible to vote.
Sure. Okay, well, I guess the more senior member, I think, would be Nathan, right? So I would have Nathan vote for tonight, and I would do it like that, just based on seniority of your appointment.
I'm just curious, what is like 2 weeks?
Maybe a couple hours.
A couple hours.
Well, the notice that I got was Nathan's before yours, so it's not.
But it's like, who's the older twin?
But it's very important that you would both.
Was it Quicksilver? Yeah.
But that being said, that's if we vote tonight.
Correct,
If it's continued to another date and no vote is taken tonight, then we would have to determine at the next meeting.
Of course.
To the extent all 5 weren't here, and that's how we
And
roll.
anyone who missed tonight, if they certified that a regular, okay.
Right, but my understanding, for clarification purposes, you couldn't miss more than one as to the certification.
One. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
So to the extent there was another hearing, and these two had missed a subsequent evidentiary hearing, and I think by hearing it would be with which there was something substantive that took
Not a
place.
continuance. That's my understanding as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that make sense? Mr.
Absolutely. That
Okay.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I don't think we knew you were coming tonight, so that's why we,
I had a 1 in 10 shot.
yeah.
I had to convince my wife.
We're glad you made it.
I was going to say thank you and thank her.
Glad you made it. So with that being said, Attorney Rosen, this is your hearing.
Thank you.
There are some new as to the record, there were some additional updates for things that we were entering statutory or definitions, legal definitions from Black's Law Dictionary that we didn't have.
Correct.
And I think a copy's been provided to you.
Yes.
And as with respect to my initial 268A disclosure that I filed at the first meeting to dispel any appearance of potential past conflict, that's still your choice. If you don't want me to chair your hearing, I don't have to chair it.
We, obviously, as we stated at the last hearing, we're comfortable.
Okay. That's
Thank you.
fine. Then you may proceed.
So I'm going to try and keep this as short and concise as possible. I think I would be better served this evening by answering questions that any of you might have. I would like to run through quickly what this particular hearing is about, how we got where we are, and what I believe the technical issues are in front of the board tonight. And then I'm going to try and do this in about 10, maybe 15 minutes or less. And then really I would rather open it to questions and be able to answer, because I know there's a lot of information out there, and I think, unless there's anything specific you would like me to further elaborate on, we had a fairly lengthy hearing last time, so I'm going to just cut to the chase.
And for the purposes, I will also allow Ms. Jacobs the opportunity to ask questions.
Yes, either or. If you want to interrupt me along the way.
Sure. I mean, just even if she's not voting at this hearing, I'll allow her to ask you questions as be part of the public hearing and discussion.
I would presume so in case she needs to vote at a future hearing.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
And there is a ball game on at 8:10.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. 1600 Osgood Street is a parcel of land in North Andover that's formerly known as the Western Electric Plant or the Lucent Facility. It's 3 legal parcels of property that total 167 acres of land and approximately 1.4 million square feet of built leasable building space. In that space, there are a myriad of different tenants, industrial, office, recreational, food, retail, that use and occupy about 700,000 square feet of that space right now. In 2006 or 7? 6? Osgood.
2007.
In 2007, town approved an overlay district called the Osgood District. And what that did is it laid an overlay over the all 3 parcels of property that identified 3 zones. One is called the Business Opportunity Zone, one is the Mixed Zone, and one is a Residential Zone. Residential zone's about 35 acres. The mix, and at this point it's in its own parcel of land. The remaining land is 2 parcels. There's 11 acres up on Holt Road, and the remaining balance, which is 120 some odd acres, which comprises the mixed and the business, is where you generally look at and see the main Lucent buildings and all of the outbuildings. Under the Osgood, you're allowed to do things that are slightly different than you are under the regular underlying industrial zone. It's zoned I2, and the way the Osgood is drafted, there are provisions in there that talk about, and in particular, point 1 of Mr. Brown's letter, within the boundaries of the Osgood, a developer may elect to either develop a site, and I'm focusing on the word site, and we'll get back to that in a minute, a site in accordance with the requirements of this section 17, or to develop a site in accordance with the requirements of the regulations for use, dimension, and other provisions of the zoning bylaw governing the underlying zoning district, which in this instance is I2. So the first finding we're looking for tonight is the building inspector made a determination that because on June 17th, 2014, there was a special permit approved under Osgood, and that special permit was for one particular building. I think the building is identified as 1632 Osgood Street. There's ACT, which is Andover Community Theater, and a special permit was approved for Andover Community Theater to take over Building 1632, to lease it, and to run an educational and theater production company out of that building. So the building inspector determined that the issuance of a special permit for that particular project, let's call it, effectively means that now the entire property is Osgood and no longer eligible for I-2. So with respect to that first determination by the building inspector in his letter of March 24th, we would argue that that's incorrect. And we would argue that's incorrect for a number of reasons. Number one, when Osgood was first passed, there were uses in the building, in particular warehousing uses, that were originally drafted in the Osgood bylaw but removed from the Osgood bylaw. So right now, you cannot, either as of right or under special permit, have warehousing in the Osgood. Now, there's 693,000 square feet of space in the building currently leased. Of it, 397,000 of it is warehousing. And the bulk of that was warehousing before Osgood passed. So Osgood would have been nonsensical if you could only be one or the other, and we already had 300,000 worth of warehousing space.
So just for discussion purposes, Councilor.
Yes.
I think it's noteworthy that site is not defined.
Correct.
In the Osgood.
Correct.
And it's not capitalized. There are a number of defined terms with respect to Section 17. So we did submit a Black's Law dictionary of what a site is in terms of for the board's understanding, since we don't have a definition.
That's a great point. If you look at the town's bylaw, the word site appears 313 times. At no point is it defined. The term lot is defined. The term parcel is defined. And in fact, at one point, a site parcel, which we presume is a parcel on which a site is located, is discussed in a section of the bylaw. But nowhere is the term site defined.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You said earlier there's 3 legal parcels of property.
Correct.
How many tax bills go out to that property?
I believe 3.
Are there 3 tax bills that go out to the property or 1?
I don't have it in front of me,
Because
but
that's how I would determine the site. How many tax bills go out
I believe there were 3.
Well, if I could draw your attention, Mr. Boucher, to the Section 7, the bylaw would, in terms, and I understand what you're saying about how you determine the site. I think that would be more specific as to how you determine what a lot is. If you look at,
But how many tax bills go out there?
I don't know.
Isn't it?
Again, I believe 3. I believe
I
there's
don't
one
know.
for the residential parcil, which is owned by one separate property owner.
Can I just direct you, because I want to just kind of hone this in.
Yeah.
Section 17.3.2 of the underlying bylaw. So the town clerk certified a record for us of Section 17 that came back with comments from the Attorney General's office. But what it says in here, it says that Osgood, it says, as required by the enabling laws, this is the beginning of this section of the bylaw, the regulations for use, dimension, and all other provisions of the zoning bylaw governing the underlying zoning shall remain in full force, except for those sites, not capitalized, undergoing development pursuant to this Section 17. Within the boundaries of Osgood, a developer may elect to either develop a site in accordance with the requirements of Section 17 or to develop a site in accordance with the requirements of the regulations for use, dimension, and all other provisions of the zoning bylaw governing the underlying zoning districts. And
So you're
that,
saying it doesn't matter?
I'm saying it wasn't, I believe it wasn't defined on purpose, because the authors of the bylaw and the act of town meeting defined 45 other definitions specific to Section 17, specific to the overlay district as it related to the Smart Growth Overlay zoning act at the time. The intent and purpose of the bylaw was to promote growth and development with respect to this site, not necessarily to limit it to one particular aspect of the
You
site.
know, one of the things that I'm very confused on is why is this in zoning, not in the planning?
Well, that's why they're here.
Okay, see, to me, all of this should be a totally planning issue.
Well, once we're done,
Okay.
once this board makes this decision, if we agree with the findings, let's say the
The
board...
findings of what?
So there's 4 questions that the applicant has submitted to us tonight to make determinations on. 5. So if the board were to agree with that, or not agree with that, it would ultimately go back to planning one way or the other, because planning would either be hearing it as an as-of-right hearing pursuant to Section 17, or they would be hearing it as a special permit. Either way, it's all based on what we decide tonight. It's ultimately going back to planning.
But why do we even have jurisdiction?
Because
that-
Chapter 40A, because Chapter 40A, Section 7, authorizes zoning boards of appeals, and it's in Section 17 of this bylaw too, that to appeal decisions of the building inspector, because he is still the enforcement officer. The guy has to make a decision, and either you agree with it or you don't agree with it, and this is the appeals process.
Okay. I understand that.
So-
So he's appealing the building inspector's decision.
They're saying we
And
don't...
that gets done through us.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
We don't agree, they don't agree with the decision that they made, because they say, hey, look, Section 17 is supposed to give us the opportunity to do what we want in the confines of the law and the confines of that bylaw, and we want our hearing, we want our day to be heard on it. And that's why they...
I get it.
So I think as we flow through and go through the 4 different points, I think it will kind of help you form a better understanding of why, in fact, we're here in front of this particular board.
Okay, to cut through a lot of the
Yep.
legal mumbo jumbo and the chase and trying to get some common sense into this, okay?
Yes.
Because we could be here till today, tomorrow, and the next day with all of these paragraphs and everything else that's being read. I have a question.
Sure.
I've spoken to some of the town officials,
Okay.
okay? And one of the town officials has told me that solar panels were already allowed on the main building itself.
Yes, twice. And we have 2 permits for that.
Right, okay.
And that's one of the arguments we're going to make later today is, how can they now say that
Okay, so the question is not whether they can have solar panels, because the town has already granted the right to have solar panels per se.
Well, no, that is the question. The building,
Chapter 4,
is...
Section 3 exempts, it lists solar as an exemption.
Yeah, but, and speaking to, and I'll even say who it was, I'm not afraid to say, the building inspector has said that over the years, you have been given permission to install solar panels on
Yes.
top of the building proper.
Correct.
So the answer to that question is yes.
Yes.
Okay, so what you people want to do is expand the solar panels from on top of the buildings to all these parking lot type panels.
And some additional ones on top of the buildings, and carports, and some open space.
Okay, now, let's cutting through the chase again, okay? The solar panels that were allowed on the building,
Yes.
it was the understanding that that would be used to subsidize the electric bills or electric rates for the tenants inside the building?
It's yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. But now, the solar panels that you're proposing with all of these off-site things and the board and all of the other parcels, you really want to become,
No, it's all contained within the commercial
Yeah, I understand.
overlay. It's not other parcels. What we're being asked to decide is
yeah, but he
within
wants to
the...
build like carports,
But-
okay? And on
but-
top of the carports, he wants to put these solar panels.
But with
Within his
respect to the boundaries, if you look at the approved town meeting overlay map, it's only within the commercial part of that.
So you're saying it's only within the commercial part of that?
Yes.
So, yeah, but let me ask another question.
Well,
So,
that's significant.
I
because
understand.
There's
No, I
three,
get it.
just for clarification, you know, there's the mixed-use area, there's the residential area, and there's the commercial area.
and they only want to do it in the commercial area?
That's what they're asking.
Okay. Now, what you intend to do with the electricity is, in addition to, let's say, subsidizing the tenants that are in the building itself, okay?
Meaning consume it within
Consume
the
it,
building,
right,
yeah.
whatever the correct word.
Yes.
You want to actually go out and sell it like Mass Electric would sell it.
No, we cannot sell it like Mass Electric could sell it. We can enter into what's called a net metering agreement. And a net metering agreement, so under state law, the utility provider has an obligation to purchase the same way that it sells electricity under certain circumstances. So we would have these facilities generating electricity. If it's consumed on the property, it's consumed on the property. If it's not consumed on the property, it's what's called the bidirectional meter,
It
the
goes back into the
electricity,
grid.
and it goes back into the grid. So let's say today we're selling them electricity because we have an excess. Tomorrow we have a shortage, so we're buying electricity. It can go back and forth, so it's a means of balancing your electric.
Okay, so let me ask you another question.
So if I just, what's the net present value of what you want to do to the town based on your ability, because at town meeting, I attended a town meeting this year where there were bylaws approved with respect to credits as it was.
Authorizing the town manager to enter into...
Could you explain that to us so we understand what that means?
Sure, net metering agreement as well as.
Because I think,
Yeah.
with respect to Mr. Kuchar's question, you know, what does that mean in terms of economic incentives to the town?
Roughly $2.2 million. That's the number we've been presenting to the town manager. That's the meeting we presented to the planning director and to the planning board.
And how do you derive it? And the tax on what?
There's pilot, so there's a negotiated tax agreement, and there are net crediting and tax benefits. And you go ahead, you want to explain the dollar value?
Sure. Yes, sir. There's two ways that the town would get value from this project. One of them is called the net metering credit agreement, where the energy that's produced and comes back into basically the National Grid Administration System, where we get a negative bill. That electric meter is actually in the town's name, and so that energy then belongs to the town. The town then would pay us at some discounted rate for that energy. So it's basically, we haven't negotiated with the town. I want to be clear about that. That would be the next step, but let's call it, say, a 5 or 10% discount on the energy that would be produced from this facility. That would be free cash to the town. The second way is through what's called a pilot, because this is taxable property. Developers of solar projects in the state set up the statute to actually allow for almost half of all solar that's going to be built in the state to be produced by private developers and sold back to municipalities. It's taxable property, so a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, would typically be set up, and that would provide for a 20 or 25-year guaranteed payment to the town in lieu of an ordinary tax assessment.
So let me ask you a question. Cape Wind. I'm sure we're all familiar with Cape Wind out in Cape Cod. Okay. In my opinion, that was being forced onto the consumer, and Mass Electric or the Commonwealth, we were being forced to eat the electricity that was generated at whatever price they generated it on. Is this project similar to something like a Cape Wind?
It is not.
With the exception of one is generated by wind, one is generated by solar?
No, all we can do is sell to the grid, and the grid buys from us at the price that they charge us. We are not generating prices. We are not selling to the consumers. We are not requiring consumers to buy anything. This is electricity.
But once it goes into the grid, it becomes consumer oriented, right?
That would be no different than if National Grid woke up tomorrow morning and changed its rates, and that's covered by the Department of Public Utilities. It's got nothing to do with what's being generated on this particular site. I mean, one of the reasons that you have solar right now, and one of the reasons that communities are participating in programs like this, is because the state has certain laws, rules, regulations where they're looking for a percentage of electricity to be generated by alternative energy resources, and this would be one of them.
And I understand the ceiling for that has been raised several times
Correct.
because of all the cities, municipalities, or whatever, that are participating. They keep going back and they keep raising the limit, right?
I think they're raising the limit because I think they want to continue to find more alternative energy sources. I think, that's the state government making a decision to raise the limit so they can generate alternative energy as opposed to traditional, biosources.
And what you're proposing is in addition to what's on the roof,
Correct.
these panels are going to be installed, for lack of other words, in the manufacturing area? Is that the correct way of saying it?
I think it's a commercial area.
In the commercial area?
So
And not in the residential and not in the other parts?
it is our belief that we would be seeking to have them installed in either the I-2 district where they're allowed as manufacturing or in the Osgood district where they are allowed as manufacturing.
So by way of history, what year was the overlay district established? 2007?
2007.
Okay. So then in 2010, by act of town meeting, which is in the record, there was additional bylaw that allowed for alternative energy and solar in the I-2 district on acres bigger than 10 acres. I don't believe there was another parcel in town that was industrial larger than 2 acres that this was intended for, other than the Osgood facility. So whether they opted, so then the ultimate issue, why it gets a little confusing is because if you take a plain reading of that initial preamble section to section 17, a developer or the owner can elect to permit something either under the underlying zoning, which is I-2, which is where it is allowed, or they can elect to come forward under the Osgood Overlay Zoning District. So that's sort of the developer's election. But clearly in 2010, it was approved by town meeting.
You know, as you have a question mark in the definition of site, I have a question in the definition of manufacturing and generation,
Okay.
okay? It was generation when you generate electricity, or do you manufacture electricity?
Okay, so under Massachusetts law and under the court cases, you look first to the statute. If the statute is plain on its terms and conditions, you go with the statute. If the statute is not clear on its terms and conditions, then you can refer to other laws within the Commonwealth. And if you can't refer to other laws and make other analogies based on the plain meaning and context of the language, then you can add additional definitions by looking to dictionaries. I would presume first where it's legal, you might start with a legal dictionary, and if it's not in a legal dictionary, then you would go to the common terminology of a word under a regular dictionary. So where you talk about manufacturing here, I would offer two examples. Manufacturing is already defined, and it's already defined to include solar power. If you look at section, I want to read the exact language.
There's a number of statutes that we put in the record with respect to.
But there were also some that I had introduced at the last meeting.
You have been handed?
Yeah, it should be right in front of you in that package.
Okay, yeah, I see.
In the court.
Under 4.133 of your zoning bylaw, industrial district, section 11, and this is the section Al just referred to as being modified in 2010. Section 11 was the definition dealing with light manufacturing. In 2010, that definition was revised so that it now has an 11A and 11B. 11A stays light manufacturing, and 11B in this manufacturing subsection is renewable or alternative energy research and development facilities, renewable or alternative energy manufacturing, such as solar. So you consider solar energy as manufacturing by the clear language of the statute. Okay, so that's within the town, you do so. You call it solar manufacturing. In addition, under the state statutes, and I believe it's 164, Section 1, they define, this is an entire statute, which is nothing other than, the title of the chapter is Manufacture and Sale of Gas and Electricity. So this is the definitions under Massachusetts law of the manufacture of electricity. So they use the term with respect to manufacturer, you know, electricity is manufacturing, and within the definitions in Section 1, generation or a generation facility is a plant or equipment used to produce, manufacture, or otherwise generate electricity.
But do me a favor,
Yep.
save me looking through all of these papers.
Yes,
Show me
I'm
that.
happy to do it.
Right.
I believe Angela circulated most of these documents.
I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
Make it quick and easy. It is your
Show me-
question, and I would.
Yeah, show me
So,
the page you're reading.
164, Section 1.
Okay, hold
So-
on. Okay, see
Yep.
if I have it. Angela, do I have this? So it's in all these general law things here?
Some may have come out for the last hearing, and some.
Here, let me, so you have 25A, 25A3, 164-1. So the chapter itself is called Manufacture and Sale of Gas and Electricity. Okay, and within that, they define, using your term generation, so they define a generation facility, so they're using your term generation, as a plant or equipment used to produce,
That's it.
manufacture, or otherwise generate electricity. So manufacture is, okay,
Give me 2 minutes to read it.
you got it.
I'd also like to draw everyone's attention to one of the things that came in from the town clerk's office when I had asked for a certified copy of the bylaw, are the comments that come back from the Attorney General's office. And as it relates to uses that fall under Chapter 40, Section 3, of which solar is one of them, there are, the AG's office cautions the town with respect to special permits. It says, we call the town's attention to Section 17.6.4, which pertains to prohibited uses and provides that all uses not expressly allowed are prohibited. In approving Section 17.6.4, we remind the town of the protections accorded to certain uses and structures under General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3, General Laws. Chapter 40A, Section 3 provides for exemptions from local zoning for uses and structures, including agricultural structures, religious uses, education purposes, and certain daycare centers. Thus, the town cannot prohibit, require a special permit, or unreasonably regulate those uses that are accorded protections under General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 3. We caution the town to apply the proposed bylaw, including Section 17.6.4, in a manner consistent with General Law, Chapter 48, Section 3.
I want to add one point to that.
And solar is also listed under 40, Section 3.
Earlier you had mentioned that your regulation says that it's allowed on 10-acre site, and you believe other than 2-acre sites that this I-2 site is the only site that qualified as the 10-acre site. I actually want to make a further clarification that makes it even more obvious. The law you just read says they cannot restrict it or require a special permit for it. It has to be an as-of-right use. Your bylaw says in order to have an as-of-right use, you have to be a minimum of 25 acres and 10 acres with a special permit, which means you need a 25-acre industrial property. And there isn't one. It's not, as Al said earlier, you're looking at 2-acre parcels. So,
from where I sit, just one person, it's a very plain reading to me. I think there, methods and materials of construction are one thing, but I understand how the Attorney General Office cautions the town on these types of prohibitions. We've also taken note of the case that was submitted to us, or at least I have.
So the argument would be that if Mr. Brown's letter is correct, and this site can now only be used for Osgood, and industrial is gone for the entirety of the 167 acres, then that means that you do not have a section where solar is allowed as of right, and therefore you're in violation of 48 Section 3. And that's, I think, the point that Al was trying to make. So if I can go back to my original argument, because I think I got to the very first sentence and we kind of got a little off track. What is a site? You have defined terms in your bylaw, you have undefined terms in your bylaw. So you have to take a look at it, and you have to take some, note of statutory construction, dictionary definition. So we have a lot of that in the file. But from a practical perspective, and I agree with you, put the legal mumbo-jumbo away for a second, and let's just look at factually, okay? In 2007, when the Osgood was adopted, there were 300,000 square feet of warehousing. Warehousing's not allowed in Osgood. Did the applicant make a choice at that time that it was electing I-2? From 2007 going forward, we asked Jerry Brown, the building inspector, to summarize the permits issued. There were 78 permits issued. 55 of them are identified as I-2. None of them are identified as Osgood. No, he's wrong, by the way. He's missing the one that was Osgood, and that was the one for Act. For some reason, it's not coming up on the list. So I would offer that there were more than 78 permits that he's listed, but of those, only one. So there were some that are I-2 before Act was permitted. There were some that were I-2 after Act was permitted. And in these 78 permits that he lists, there's at least a dozen that are only allowed in I-2 and are not allowed in Osgood either at all or without a special permit. So you have schools, no school without a special permit. You have activities, youth centers, youth carnivals, laser tag, Under Osgood, those are only allowed with a special permit. You have warehousing, you have more warehousing, you have the photovoltaic arrays. If his argument is correct, none of those dozen-plus permits would have been approved.
Well, and I also want to add that I also sent out supplemental questions.
Correct.
Because I was looking for some clarification in 2007 to know. The bylaw is silent as to how a developer may elect. It is silent as to what the requirement would be. It doesn't say it would be express. It doesn't say it would be by permit. It doesn't say through some kind of notice. It's a very general election. My recollection of that point in history is it was that way on purpose. But I also want to add that it's not lost on me that applications that were coming in under Osgood were supposed to be circulated to other boards under Chapter 17.13.2. So once it went to the Plan Approval Authority, which in this case would be the Planning Board, they were supposed to circulate an application to all the other boards, including the Board of Appeals. I don't think in my time here since 2004, at least our record doesn't have any record of that having happened. So it leads me to believe, back to my original summation, that this was intended to promote growth and development and not to be an overly restrictive type of permitting process. So for the purposes of our record, we don't have any records that show that anything was ever circulated to the other boards.
Correct. So in the 8+ years since Osgood was adopted, there's been one Osgood permit issued, and that permit wasn't actually even issued in compliance with the guidelines. Had to be notified to every other board within 60 days of the date of the application. Clearly, the planning department, the building inspector, nobody in town thought that an election was getting made. Nobody thought an election was being made that was binding on the property. Our point is, we believe site is an undefined term, and site really should be construed as meaning a project. We take a look at the ACT building, and in that building, we put in a theater company. Okay, I can't come back to you now and tell you that I'm going to put an industrial user in the theater company. That building, based on our election to use that building as a theater company, we've defined that as a site, and that particular site is now a site that we have selected Osgood on. We have. I think in the warehousing, where we permitted and approved warehousing in the warehouse building, we have made a selection. That building is warehousing. We can't now come in and put a food court next to the warehousing on this side and the warehousing on this side. We've defined at least roughly the parameters of a site that is allowed for warehousing. We can't flip-flop back and forth. We can't do different things, but we have to focus on what actually is a site. If we get a residential buyer and the residential buyer closes and starts to build the property, those residential units would then be elected to be that particular site. So I think, you can look at tax records, but if you look at tax records, then the answer is it's I-2, and the town made a mistake by allowing ACT Theater in. I don't think that was the intent. I don't think we ever, I don't think anybody ever looked at it that way. And we're kind of surprised that, after issuing 78 permits under I-2, we're surprised that when we went to go get an I-2 permit for a new solar array, we were told you no longer can do it because you have one special permit on one building in the back of the in the back of the property that you pulled a year ago. And by the way, you've pulled other permits since then, but because you pulled that permit on that, I'm going to call that a site, you're precluded from doing any other I-2 anywhere else on the property.
So what you're saying is because, and I hope he doesn't shoot me, because the building inspector made a mistake in issuing that permit.
No, I don't think he did.
For the theater.
My point is,
Because he made a mistake. So now we have to eat all the rest of the mistakes?
I don't think he necessarily made a mistake.
No, I said,
no.
maybe I was
It's a
wrong choice of words.
it's a complicated bylaw. I mean, I've spent a lot of time reading Section 17. All right? And we, Alan and I were on the board of appeals back in 2007 when this whole thing was going on. And back in that point in time in history, there was a 40B before us that wanted more housing than what was negotiated under the Smart Growth Overlay District. You know, the Smart Growth Overlay District was a give and take. You know, it was being pushed by the state at that time. There were financial incentives to the town to adopt it. It was, I believe, declared unanimously adopted at town meeting. And with it, you know, it was designed to promote economic growth and development. I mean, one of the things that I was concerned about it back in those days was what I saw as the lack of municipal police power, in a way, because it really allowed for so much diverse growth and development. But it was adopted, and we have it now. And there was financial components for, from the state and the town to adopt the Smart Growth Overlay District. And, you know, I think it's sometimes unfair for building inspectors to have to interpret all the zoning codes and all the different laws that go along with it, because, you know, they have so much to do in a day, and it's very complex stuff. But a plain reading of it really, you know, from my view, says it's allowed.
I do want to be clear. I don't think he made a mistake. I think he looked at each project as a standalone project, and in his mind, the project was the site. And that's how I read the statute. You look at it, a site, in my reading of it, because it's not defined as a parcel of property or a lot with a capital P, a capital P, or a capital L, is a particular project. And in this instance, the project was Act Theater. In prior instances, it was a warehouse.
In fact, projects are defined terms under Section 17.
Under Section 17.
And they have projects defined as it relates to specifically commercial.
Specific.
Or specific.
Correct.
You know, so those, and, you know, and that kind of goes to the point where the pains were taken to define those points, you know,
Correct.
in order to comply and get the Attorney General's approval of the overlay.
Correct. So my point only was, if a mistake was made, if the argument is you had to pick one or the other, and once you picked, you were done for the whole tax parcel map ID,
Precedent was set.
then the mistake was made by issuing Act. I'm saying, if that's how you interpret it. I don't interpret it that way.
Well, that's what you're saying. You're saying the precedent has been set because of the issuance of the permit for that stage company, if that's what it is.
The precedent has been set that you can pick by location within the property, and that's a site. Warehousing was a site, it was okay. Act was a site, it was okay. Laser Craze was a site, it was okay. We allowed different things on different areas of the larger parcel.
And I don't think there's a case on point with respect to this one issue either.
No, I think
Because
obviously...
This is a relatively new zoning statute, you know, so, I mean, in terms of the overlay.
And there were relatively few 40Rs in the entire state, so it's not...
And, you know, I had the benefit, between the last meeting and this one, Mr. Koch and I actually had an opportunity to attend the Osgood facility with the Director of Economic...
J. Ash.
Secretary
Ash.
And the local delegation, and tour the facility, and, you know, just for educational purposes, to understand a little bit more about the state's involvement with trying to promote growth and development for the site. And, you know, it's a very large, you know, you don't realize how big it is once you get there and you actually see it and you walk through it. So, you know, the state is very involved in terms of wanting to promote growth and development, you know, as evidenced by his presence and being here, the managers being there, and the selectmen, but, you know, the manner in which they promote these overlay districts, and the purse strings are attached to it.
So when it comes down to this, do we think his project is going to enhance the development of the old Western Electric site?
I don't think that's what we're being asked.
Well, I think that's what it comes down to.
Okay, so here's, I don't think that's the legal standard, but I still want to answer your question. And we believe the answer is yes. If we didn't think so, we wouldn't be spending the money doing it. And the reason we believe so is this. 40R was adopted in 2007. We're sitting here in 2015, and we haven't had more luck. We lose tenants for whatever reason. They want to be closer to the city. They want to be closer to transportation. We were hoping the train station might get open. We had 2 different residential developers under contract with us. Both of them, after due diligence, looking at the sewer connection permit, looking at some of the other issues, walked away from us. We need to do something to jumpstart. We would like to have biotechnology, kind of trendy companies. And we looked around and we saw, you know, there's lots of places building solar carports. If you look at Google and what Google does on its campus to attract people, The next generation, they drive Kias. I don't know why. I always grew up wanting to drive a Camaro convertible. Shame on me. But the next generation wants to be environmentally conscientious. My son would kill me if I didn't take the recycle bins out. So we feel like this generation that's coming up is going to be looking for these types of things, and we're hoping. Look, we've got solar carports. How cool is that? You can park your car under a carport. You got solar on the roof. We're making money for the town. We're making money for ourselves. We've got a cool addition to the facility. Now, we went out and we actually talked to people about it. Do you think it would be helpful? Everyone we talked to said yes. At the last hearing, someone actually said to us, really, even for residential? We went to our residential broker and we said, hey, okay, tell us, is it going to help us? And in fact, he wrote and said that it would. And we asked him to, put it in writing, but we asked him. And his opinion was that it would be beneficial to us. He thinks that that's the type of thing that in today's day and age is going to help attract people to a property, and it's certainly not going to take away. Your car's covered, you got cheaper electric, you got solar, you're kind of cool.
The state maintains a list, and the entire property area is on a list in which the state wants to send, certain types of economic companies looking for particular uses, whether they be specific power uses that come from the old Western Electric, the size of their electrical services and so forth. I heard different tenants talk about, they have people there that work to do testing for underwriter laboratories, at that meeting with Secretary Ash. So, but there's a lot that can be done. But with respect to what we're being asked just to make findings, and the findings have to be constrained in the law as it relates to 48 Section 3.
I'm going to tell you the way I feel. Okay?
It has to be, because if and when, if you ask me if I want to be named in an appeal, the answer is no, I don't.
I understand that. Okay. The way I feel is this, okay? Trying not to be a communist, these people own the property, and they want to do what's best for the property. And I don't want the town to, quote, take an undertaking, gain title of the property without telling the taxpayer what to do with their property, if I'm saying this right. And if we pass this, it still goes to planning, and planning can dice it up the way they see fit.
So there's been
Right, that's the way I see it,
If it goes back to planning,
okay?
there were two things. It can go back for site plan review under...
Yeah, but see, I believe it should be in planning. It shouldn't be in zoning.
Well, we are in planning.
No, you're in zoning tonight.
No, all right. So we're in front of planning, and the decision was made because we were appealing Jerry's decision, because in planning, we don't know what we're doing in planning yet. Are we in I-2? Are we in 40R? Is it site plan? Is it site plan approval? Is it site plan special permit? What are we doing and why are we there? We appealed Jerry's decision. We have an open planning meeting. We actually are back there next Tuesday night.
When did you apply to planning? When did you file the planning petition?
I think roughly the same time, around April 7th. So, yep.
To answer your question, Alan, Mike, tell me if you agree. If you reverse Jerry's decision, they still have to go to planning.
Right, I understand that.
Correct.
Right.
One way or another.
Or another.
Because they will wind up in planning, not under a special permit umbrella application. But I think even they agree, right, Mike?
Yes.
That they have to go to planning for site plan approval.
And
Correct.
this is where I think it belongs,
Well, and that's where it will go.
at the ultimate decision.
If you make a decision to, overturn Jerry's decision, they still have to go.
I understand.
To plan.
I get it. Yeah.
Did you, as part of your planning application, did you request a building permit?
I don't think we got there. I think Jerry told us
So
we
you-
had to go. He
so-
wouldn't even let us get...
So with respect to the methods and materials of construction, you haven't even had the opportunity to submit any of that to the building inspector?
Nothing. And we haven't gotten comment, we haven't gotten peer review, nobody's told us, could you move them back further from the street, could you plant trees?
This is
Could
all
you do-"
about the use, Alan.
This is...
I get it. No,
All about
Right.
the use.
Based
I get it.
based on Jerry's letter, he's basically saying, we can't even go forward in planning, and if you watch the planning board meetings, the chairman is basically saying, I just want to open the hearing and deny you. which, by the way, I'm not 100% sure is right, but I think we should have the chance to present first. But the point is, Jerry's letter says we can't even go forward.
I understand.
And so the first point under Jerry's letter is, what is a site? He says it's the whole kit and caboodle. Our answer is, it can't be the whole kit and caboodle, both from a legal perspective and statutory construction, but also from a practical perspective. You haven't treated it that way in 8.5 years. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, okay, solar installation for purposes of a generating facility. He's not going to allow us to move forward because this is solar generation. It's not an as-of-right use under 17.6.1.2. Well, first of all, we didn't apply under 17.6.1.2. We applied under 17.6.3.2. 17.6.3.2 is considered an as-of-right use, and subsection 13 is manufacturing, and we just went through the definition of manufacturing. So we do believe an as-of-right use, and now I believe, Attorney Orbalis, and this was the question you were just asking me, even if it's an as-of-right use in the Osgood overlay, we still have to get site plan approval. As of right doesn't mean go pull your building permit, because anything in Osgood requires site approval. Okay, so question number two is this generating and therefore not manufacturing, or is it manufacturing? Our point is it's manufacturing. State law calls it manufacturing. Your own bylaw uses the word manufacturing in describing solar generation. Point number three, he says, all other uses not expressly allowed or prohibited. Our belief is our use is expressly allowed. It says manufacturing. It doesn't say manufacturing but not solar. It says manufacturing, and within your own bylaw in 4.13311B, you define solar under a subcategory of manufacturing. And then
Are we stretching that a little bit, though?
I don't think so. You had a section 11, that defined manufacturing. You took section 11 and you broke it into 11A and 11B, and you defined two different types of manufacturing. 11B uses the specific term,
Renewable or alternative energy research and development. Right.
or alternative energy manufacturing such as solar.
I see.
So you define manufacturing to include a subset of solar. So now he's saying, because we only use the word manufacturing and we didn't tell you what kind of manufacturing, we have the right to decide what type of manufacturing it is. And we disagree. It's manufacturing. Okay? Then his last point is, manufacturing, in my opinion, an installation for purposes of generating facility for some utility users who are not on site is not manufacturing. He basically says you can only manufacture if something's going to be used on site. Well, that's just nonsensical. Jessica's brick oven is manufacturing. The bread's not all used on site. It's not sold on site. It's not used on site. What's interesting is actually the electricity is sold on site. Our net metering equipment is on site. The sale of that electricity is actually taking place on our property. So if you read Jerry's letter literally,
Well, yeah, but let's say this, but the actual consumer might not be, quote, as you say, on site.
But the
That
consumer
actual
of the-
consumer could be somewhere in Groveland or Georgetown, right? Because of the excess electricity that's being made.
the consumer of bread that's manufactured on site isn't going to be in
Because
North
it's going
Andover.
back into the grid.
The bread's going into a supermarket grid. It's getting put in trucks, it's getting brought somewhere, and someone's consuming it. The fact that he's tying our approval to whether or not it's being manufactured and used on site, there's nothing in the bylaw requiring products manufactured on the property to be used on the property.
No, I understand.
Okay, so
I get it.
So our opinion at the end of the day is we should get findings, and those findings should overrule what Jerry said. Those findings should clarify that a site is a site, small s. It doesn't mean the entire parcel. It means that the town has to use its reasonable judgment to determine a project that has been applied for by the applicant, to determine that it is not doing something that is inconsistent with a project on a site that they've already elected to do at the property. That's number one. Number two, under 17.6.3.2, Manufacturing does include solar. Under 17.6.4, it's not applicable because this is not an undefined use. Solar is defined as manufacturing in the state law and in your local bylaw. And a finding under section, his letter number 4, that it doesn't have to be consumed on site. There's no such restriction in your bylaw that a manufacturer has to manufacture something on site to sell it and have it consumed on site. Last but not least, we asked for a 5th finding. One of the things that the building inspector has been saying, and one of the things that has happened at planning board, is even though we filed for plan approval, a project got advertised as a special permit, but we didn't apply for a special permit. You guys have 2 sections under 17.6.3.2. I'm sorry, 2 sections under 17.6.3. Sections. In the business opportunity zone, and the mixed use zone, and the residential zone, in each section of the OSGOD, you have a section called as of right uses and a section called uses allowed by special permit. It's our belief that you only need a special permit for uses allowed by special permit. The language follows, the following uses shall be permitted in the business opportunity zone by plan approval special permit issued by the plan approval authority as a special permit granting authority pursuant to the provisions of this section 17.6.3. Okay, so that's if you're in one of those uses. Under 17.6.3.2, the following uses shall be permitted in the business opportunity zone as of right upon plan approval. Doesn't say special permit, it says plan approval, subject to the provisions of this section. So you have 2 different sections. One is for as of right uses, which are subject to plan approval, and then you have special permit uses, which are subject to plan approval special permits. And there is a distinction, and there's a distinction under law. Plan approval is one thing, a special permit is another. Special permit's governed by Chapter 40A. Plan approval is governed by common law. We are applying under, if we apply under OSGOD as opposed to I-2, we are applying under 17.6.3.2. We are looking for plan approval, not a special permit. So that's the 5th question that we asked this board.
Saying that it's an allowed use.
It is an as-of-right use, subject to plan approval, but does not require the higher standard of special permit. Interestingly enough, too, if you read your own bylaw and you look at section 2.6.5, your bylaw defines who the special permit granting authorities are. The planning board is the special permit granting authority with regard to cluster, plan development, driveways, nursing and convalescent homes, watershed protection, wireless, and large estate condominiums. The Board of Selectmen is the special permit granting authority as to non-accessory signs. The Board of Appeals shall be the granting authority of all other special permits allowed under this bylaw. So the reason I bring this 5th issue in front of you is, if they want to keep calling it a special permit, then under 2.65, it's your special permit, not theirs. They don't have authority under 2.65 to issue special permits.
They have authority as the plan permitting authority.
They have
The people-
plan approval, and we don't dispute that. Under 17.6.3.2, they are the plan approval authority, and it would be and I will make the representation on TV in front of the board. We will be there, exactly as Attorney Urbalis has asked. We absolutely would be going to planning. We would be going for planning, for plan approval, for all of the elements of plan approval that a planning board would ordinarily do.
So, Mike, while you're talking, and maybe just, if you want to summarize on this, unless anybody has any other questions, I'm sure there'll be tons, but under the Hatfield case, towards the end of the case, at least in my copy, it talks about the language of Chapter 40A, Section 3, exempts solar collection panels that are the subject of this building permit. And it goes on to talk about Chapter 40A, Section 9, referred to as the solar provision, it states in relevant part, no zoning ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit or unreasonably regulate the installation of solar energy systems or the building of structures that facilitate the collection of solar energy, except where necessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Is that anything that's within our bylaw, and how does that apply to what you want to do here?
So when you passed Osgood, the Attorney General actually issued a comment to your Osgood bylaw, basically saying, just be careful that this 17.6.4, which is the third section that Jerry references, don't use prohibited uses as a means to get around denying solar. Okay? And that was a special note that he put in the approval of the Osgood. So in this particular instance, and the Hatfield case is a great example because we talked about it last time, and your town planner claimed that, yeah, the Hatfield case is correct. They denied it.
CD directed.
And the answer is, they denied it, but the Hatfield case actually is correct for the reasons they denied it. The Hatfield case had a bylaw that specifically defined 3 types of solar that they allowed. The court found that you could, in fact, permit under solar under one of those 3 circumstances, and then, in fact, Hatfield was trying to argue they didn't fit into one of the 3, and therefore 40A Section 3 applied. And the court said, hey, wait a second. 40A Section 3 would apply if you couldn't fit into one of these 3, but you can. Well, here, nobody can fit in. It's industrial. It's 4.13311B. As of right, which is 40A Section 3, it has to be as of right. North Andover only allows it as of right on industrial parcels of land greater than 25 acres. There is one industrial parcel of land greater than 25 acres in North Andover, and it's this parcel. So if you say that effectively they cannot go on this parcel, you have in fact done exactly what the Attorney General commented that you shouldn't do. This is it. Now you have a bylaw that says there's nowhere in town that you can have solar. Questions?
Koch?
Questions? I've spent way too much time with this. Probably not as much time as you
No,
have.
that's okay.
You're on the clock. Good for you. I'm I'm way off the clock on this stuff. And I am twisted in knots, Counselor, trying to find a way to. I see the arguments that you're making. I'm just not persuaded by them. And my challenge is I am similarly seduced by many of the attributes associated with this project. That's not my purview. It got brought up earlier. You know, you made pronouncements about the benefits to the town and how it can assist in the development of the parcel. And I don't buy them. I know a little something about development, and no matter what the residential broker says about the site next door having 15,000 solar panels, maybe additive to the residential, in my anecdotal survey of other people in the industry, it's not additive to the commercial development of the 2 districts that are not residential, the sub-districts, I beg your pardon, in this enormous development opportunity. The hindrance is not necessarily the solar panels in this regard. The hindrance is the building itself. Unless God taps the Commonwealth, North Andover, and 1600 Osgood Street on the shoulder and says, I have found you a 1 million square foot manufacturing tenant, it's fallow. And it's hard for me to believe that putting 15,000 solar panels is going to fill this 170 acres with life. That's going to somehow this is going to bring tenants to 1600 Osgood Street. Feels fallacious. But that's not, frankly, I don't have the luxury or the responsibility of opinion on the merits, the business and development merits of the project. So I confess that I stumble over that. I confess to the remaining members of the board. I confess to you. I confess to the TV and any appellate folks that take this thing further on. that I'm struggling with, A, the development merits of it and the legal merits of it. So I walked in here tonight expecting to and endeavoring to stick to the legal stuff that you started with. And I'm not suggesting that you derailed the conversation. This conversation is ripe for derailment. I mean, this is an enormous, impactful piece of property in the town of North Andover. And this project is an enormous, impactful, I'm not sure which way it's impactful, whether it's a positive or a negative. So it's much more fun, frankly, for me to talk about the business and development merits of it. Nonetheless, I got to try to stay focused. And I look at the 5 questions you ask and the 4 points that Jerry made, and I think about my role in this. And my role, I'm reviewing the building inspector. Whoever reviews me, assuming I'm assuming things go backwards or sideways here, and then this goes on to, another appellate review. Where the local boards are afforded tremendous discretion. There's deference to the local opinions unless there's some clear error. And I look in Jerry's letter, and I am struggling to find the clear error. I appreciate the arguments. I get them. I get the arguments. Cite to me, in every practical and legal sense of the term, cannot possibly mean to me, and I can't possibly ascribe to the drafters of this bylaw, which included your client. I think we all can appreciate your client had no small hand in asking for, advocating for, and collaborating with and developing this bylaw. So the word cite, to me, just as a function of get out of the legal mumbo jumbo, means I almost used some French there, means that big old lot of land. It doesn't mean 250 individual micro-sites is a site. There aren't opportunities, to me, as a practical, not necessarily legal, because I think that legal is a different argument. As a practical matter, I can't imagine that whomever drafted this said, you know what, we've got 170 acres here, I'm going to draft this so that I can have, call it a half-acre, 1,000-square-foot microsites around, and they're all going to be individually ascribed, for lack of a better term. I'm not sure what the right language is there. That feels silly to me, in the same way that your argument, and it can be persuasive, in the same way that your argument is just because the applicant submitted this one-act special permit, it sucked the entire parcel into Osgood. I mean, that feels absurd to you. It feels the opposite extreme feels equally absurd to me, and possibly absurd that there could be hundreds of sites within this parcel.
So as to his finding number one that we're asking for, his statement number one that we're asking for a finding on is that the whole parcel now is Osgood because we elected Osgood. But wouldn't you find that the 78 permits that came before the one Osgood permit are more determining than the one Osgood permit? It went on for 8 years with I-2 permits. Correct me.
When did the Osgood permit come? 2014 is what I hear.
Yes.
How many of those 70 precede the 2014 Osgood permit, and how many are afterward? Regardless of the answer, I imagine the numbers are stark. But
June 17, 2014 was the Osgood. Prior to that date, I'm going to see if I can find one.
No, I'm not interested in prior, because it's the act special permit that Jerry is suggesting triggered the Osgood coming down on the parcel, coming down on the site.
Well, why would the other permits not trigger if we made an election? Okay, so there were 3 after so far. So of the 78 that he's located so far, 75 will be 4, and I've got 3 after. I mean, by his own actions in issuing the permits, he's recognizing that there's more than one site here. But if there is only one site, then I would think that the 75 permits would control over the one.
The way I'm looking at it is before the Osgood, by Chapter 17, Act 17, whatever this thing is, Section 17, which is the Osgood, is essentially an option for the developer, is an option for the applicant. And the option is, hey, whenever you're ready, Mr. Applicant, come on in with the Osgood. Until that day occurs.
That's not what it says. It says they may elect either. Okay? It doesn't say they may elect Osgood, and when they do, they're Osgood. It says they may elect either. So if that's the interpretation, then the first 75 got to control. If the first 75 don't control and only Osgood controls, then you're in violation of 48 Section 3. Because now you do not have a parcel of land in the town where solar is allowed as of right. Which means then, as of right, you have to grant the right to move forward on this particular site, because now, if the argument is it's Osgood, then it's over. I mean, you can't say no, because you don't have an allowed site, and that's exactly what the Attorney General warned of. So maybe it's not 2,000 microcosms, but it's also not one. And I'm not advocating that it's 2,000. I think the language that I used earlier was that the town has to act in a reasonable manner to make a determination based upon what's taking place at the site. And by way of example, with ACT, okay, there are 16 buildings on the property. ACT took an entire building. I would reasonably argue that that building is an Osgood site. Okay, there's a building that is nothing but warehousing. I think it's building 1560.
Wouldn't ACT only be an Osgood site unless and until you had a new occupant that wanted to go in there?
Well,
in which case you could
mean,
elect either.
That's a question for another day. Can
You
you
know,
withdraw a permit and go get a new one and change somebody from?
I mean, why would it's an overlay district. It's not a superseding zoning district.
No, it's an overlay.
Why would you maintain the underlying zoning if the intent was to irrevocably change it until town meeting changes the bylaw?
I don't disagree with you. I mean, that's the whole point here, is that it wasn't intended to do the whole, it could not possibly have been intended to do the entire property, because there were over 300,000 square feet of warehousing space. And warehousing was in the Osgood Business Opportunity Zone in the draft. And it was stricken, which essentially meant on the day the Osgood was drafted, we had 300,000 square feet of tenant that would not have been eligible on Osgood, which would have made the adoption of the entire Osgood bylaw. If Jerry's logic is correct, once you elect either, you're done. We would have been done on the day Osgood passed. It can't be 2,000, but it can't be one either. And that's our point. It's not, you do not see me standing here saying 2,000. I am not advocating that. And the best example I can use is ACT. We gave them a building. That's a site. It's theirs. We have a warehousing building. So 1632 is ACT. It's a building, it's done. 1560 is the High Bay warehousing building. It's warehousing, it's done, it's I-2. By getting ACT approved, do I need to go evict 393,000 tenants now because their use is unlawful? Can I not renew their leases? I mean, and that's that's part of the reason we're so zealously, arguing this. The determination is so nonsensical, we would have to start evicting 400,000 square feet of tenants.
I mean, that feels, an absurdist argument. That's just to make a point, because no, of course, there is no zoning bylaw that is going to make you evict any tenants, and regardless of the developer's election one way or the other. The uses would be grandfathered, for heaven's sake. That doesn't feel like a good argument, Counselor, because that couldn't happen. I mean, everybody would be in court on that one.
But to argue that a tenant that barely pays rent, it's more of a charitable, endeavor than anything else, is going to taint the entire property for the future of the property, that also is, a stretch.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
I'm sorry?
It's arguably a taking.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great argument. It arguably is a taking.
It's a taking that the applicant has created, however. The applicant wrote the bylaw. The applicant advocated for the bylaw. The applicant
The town wrote the bylaw. The applicant
law said it was okay.
was induced in 2007.
No one-
Because they had a 40B application before us that reduced the number of houses, and the town was, received sums from the state for the adoption of the overlay district.
Understood. understood. It should have been an everyone wins kind of thing.
So, and
But in
one of the benefits that came out of the 40R was the reduction of
The
housing.
number of units.
The number of units with respect to that housing section.
I think it came from like 760 down to 530.
It was a substantial,
It was a substantial reduction. And a
Substantial.
payment was made to the town. So, I mean, we didn't draft it. We worked with the town. It was a cooperative effort. But at the end of the day, there are mistakes in the
And I was at the town
documentation.
meeting that adopted it, you know. And quite frankly, I don't mind saying I voted against it, because I was maybe one of three. Because I thought it was far too generous with respect to the municipal police power. But the town adopted it, and here it is. And now we have to work within the constraints of it. And I think the planning board, quite candidly, you know, can do their job effectively.
Right.
Whether it's a site plan approval or whether it's a special permit, at the end of the day, it's what they do. And to the extent that there hasn't been any dialogue yet in terms of, you know, the totality of the project or what else can be done in the site or the placement or whatever, I mean, that's all part of the planning process.
Correct.
So, if our board can simply stay focused as to the law, which is, I think, what we should be focused on, you know, understanding the totality of what's going on. I think the economic incentive is important, you know, it goes to the weight. But, you know, I think we just sort of I think we should be focused on, you know, Chapter 40A, Section 3, Section 9, and, you know, what that means, the underlying bylaw, and let the planning board do what they do, you know? I mean, that's where I see this hearing as the track I think it should be on, rather than, you know, I mean, I'm in support of what you want to do, because
Thank you.
I can read the tea leaves, and, you know, and I can read the appeal process, and, you know, I've been named in prior appeals, you know, and we felt zealous about certain points of view, and even helped shape some case law one way or the other, for good or bad, I don't know, but, you know, I don't know if that's necessarily, you know, in this particular case, you know, a valuable way for the town to be spending their resources, you know, defending something that's exempted under Chapter 48, Section 3, when really the planners and the building inspector, and they all have different roles, could simply be working through the planning process with the uses. You know, I think that is a more valuable way for the town to be, you know, going forward, not arguing over what's exempt and what isn't, when there's clear precedent and case law, you know. But I understand what you're saying. I just say, let the planning process be allowed to take its course. It's just, from what I've heard, it doesn't sound like the planning process has been allowed to take its course. It sounds like it's stalled, and it's stalled because of this finding.
Unfortunately, there's no black and white answer. It's reference to case law. It's reference to concepts. It's reference to legal arguments. It's reference to prior conduct of town officials. 78 permits is 78 permits. It's tough to say that you can only have one and nothing else. It's kind of a bitter pill to swallow. After the applicant has spent a lot of money, generated a lot of revenue for the town. I mean, if you look at the building permits, okay, the 78 that have been approved under I-2, they generated $110,000 in fees. Okay, the project is going to generate $2.2 million in fees. So why have we, you know, I mean, we've been coming in under I-2. We had a particular project that was, again, was a nice thing to do for a neighborhood charitable theater company. And that's going to set the project back millions and millions of dollars? It just seems nonsensical.
Council?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of points. One is, I would just suggest to the board that we've had some discussion this evening about the business aspects of this and the economic viability or the economic benefits. I'd suggest to you that should have absolutely nothing to do with your consideration with regard to what's in front of you. I mean, it's been nice to understand what's been going on and, you know, be concerned about whether it's viable or not, or whether it's going to. But that's, for this board, that's not your role. There are other boards that may be involved at some point in the various scenarios, but with regard to the interpretation as to what the zoning says or what the building inspector did, I would just suggest to you that's not within your purview with what's in front of you tonight. Then the second point I want to make is based upon things that have evolved over the last two hearings and things that discussed tonight. You should be concerned about considering what the Attorney General suggested, that we in town here not take action or take interpretations that would effectively prohibit solar, as in 40 Section 3 or Section 9. And that can happen with various interpretations of various parts of the bylaw on a particular project, and every town is different with regard to its bylaws and how they are in effect applied to various properties. But I would just caution to be very concerned that you might be prohibiting, under various interpretations here, you might be prohibiting solar, which is exactly what the Attorney General had cautioned about. So, it's just
That's spot-on advice, and I think the board would be wise to take that for what it's worth. Thank you.
Well,
Look,
Paul was the last question, so
Oh.
did you have any other questions?
I guess there were other I can't keep them straight, Counselor.
Trust me, I'm with you.
I spent the night after the first hearing, I scurried through the materials because I was hoping to find, a clear path toward a solution one way or the other. At the time, I was absolutely indifferent to what the path is. Just find myself some clarity. Didn't succeed. I did more of it this week while I've been on vacation, and I can't find clarity. Your presentation obviously is a helpful way of illuminating ways of thinking. I still can't find clarity, of course, and you've said as much yourself. It's not clear. It's references. We're in and out of sections, in and out of chapters, in and out of local law, state law. There's probably federal law in here somewhere that I have absolutely no idea what's going on. So with all that said, I can't keep things straight. I haven't done anything this hard since law school, quite frankly. And that was a long time ago. So whatever muscles or calluses I had have evaporated. I've got, I'm getting thinner on top, thicker around the middle, and just dumber every day.
I'm a professor one day and use this as an exam question.
It's a winner. It's absolutely a winner.
Absolutely.
This is a semester's project. So one of the other things that kind of pops out to me, somewhere in we're in the 17.6.3.2, the as of right uses, you point to manufacturing, capital and manufacture, everything's all capitalized there, nonetheless, which I have a hard time, all of us try to divine what was occurring in the past. And you can make an argument one way or the other, and I'm struggling to think that there was anybody who was drafting this thing, whether it be from the applicant's team or from the town's team or any of the masses at town meeting, ever thought that the word manufacturing, number 13, ever could have reached to a solar farm of 15,000 solar panels. I cannot imagine that was in anybody's mind, a twinkle in their eye. People can disagree, of course. And I wasn't there in 2007. I wasn't there in 2006. I've got plenty of experience in legislative drafting. I've done it at all three levels. I know how hard this is. So I'm not unsympathetic to the drafters. I'm not unsympathetic to the applicant who is now having trouble with this thing that they were advocating for. I'm not unsympathetic to the board who is now trying to figure out what was going on 7 or 8 years ago. I'm not unsympathetic to the next appellate board that's going to be hearing about this. They're going to be smarter than me, probably put more time in it than I have. But I see number 13, capital and manufacturing. Can't imagine that anyone considered that was going to be a solar farm of 15,000 panels. Obviously an accessory use, which is what you have now, the last two permits for solar panels are accessory uses to the building. Piece of cake, easy, as of right. 17.6.3.3, the next page, again, we're getting into, this is local level legislative drafting. I don't expect everything to be perfect. The very next section, 176333, the uses allowed by special permit, includes number 12, windmills. If alternate energy is indeed, is this special class, if alternate energy manufacturing, whether generation, whatever the right word is, we wouldn't need number 12 if it fell under number 13 in the previous section. We don't need to know about windmills as special permits if, as of right, electrical manufacturing is allowed.
Could have to do with the height. It's possible. It's possible that the concern is a windmill is more visually obstructive, and why they put in a definition specifically concerning the height. But again, you can't read into something that's not there. I mean, when you...
That's our job tonight, is to read into something to try to find what's there.
But you have a definition that includes the definition of solar within alternative energy manufacturing.
A characterization of that definition, I don't disagree with you, that you can absolutely make your argument with a straight face and feel like you're right, and we could both go to our graves thinking that we are right on the interpretation of manufacturing in that regard.
I'll take out the newest case, which is the case on solar, which is the So case, the Hatfield case, and they tell you that that's where you start.
And again, you've been through it a lot more than I have. When I read the case, there was something distinguishable about it that was quite different from our fact pattern. And so I read the case. I appreciate the case. I'm not finding my way to have it be as applicable as you would, want it to be. I mean, I get it.
You'd add all the exemptions under 40A Section 3 in each section because they're already exempt.
Again, that's a,
You already know they're exempt by statute.
If this board came up with a determination tonight and passed on all of the other determinations and just said under 48 Section 3, it's allowed, because by not allowing it, we're violating 48 Section 3 and violating the exact provision that the Attorney General warned us not to violate, and we'll approve it under 48 Section 3 with the caveat that you have to get plan approval. Yeah, that's... I mean, there's 5 findings here.
Right.
Okay?
So-
They run a multitude of different things. I mean, I do feel strongly about number 1, at least to some extent, that I do believe Mr. Brown is wrong in now characterizing the entire parcel as an Osgood parcel.
Well, we have 5 findings in front of us, so we're going to take action
On each.
If we close the public hearing tonight, and where it's a little after 9, 5 after 9, if we've exhausted, I don't know if anybody else wants to ask questions, or if there's more to discuss. We have a list of what the record is, so I mean, I guess once everybody's asked their questions, I would be looking to try to close the public hearing and then let the board deliberate, or, and see if we can close this out tonight. That's what I'd like to be doing. I don't know if you have anything else substantive that you want to add.
No, I mean, I think substantively, well, let me do this. Does anyone else have questions?
Wait, that's my job.
Okay. I don't want to give my final substantive comments
No, I get
until I'm sure that my
bucks
own...
to ask that question.
Okay. I just want to make sure that, before I make my final comments, that I have no other final comments to make.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Rosen that anybody would have? No, Doug, no? Mr. Koch, I know you're full of questions. I don't want to limit you. I just want to keep us focused.
It feels like my questions just end up, I present them rhetorically. There just aren't any answers.
Somewhat circular.
Stuck, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I'll tell you what, I'm going to close it. If you guys then want to formally close it and deliberate, here are the 2 things that trouble me the most by this whole thing, okay? 48 Section 3, and a characterization that the entire parcel is now Osgood. It cannot be possible. It can't. If the whole point is that we had to elect one or the other, then the 700,000 square feet of leases and the 78 permits that we pulled, or the 75 we pulled before the ACT Community Theater, are more indicative of the election. It's my opinion we didn't really ever make an election as to the whole parcel. We only made it as to portions of the parcel, which we deemed to be sites. But if we did make an election, Jerry's wrong. You can't take a 167-acre parcel and call it an Osgood parcel because we put in a charitable theater company. So that's the first one. And whether you want to call site one property or less than 2,000, and maybe it's a question for another day, but I really would implore on this board that Jerry's decision that the entire property is the site is wrong. The second is, solar's allowed here. If it's industrial, it's allowed under 13311B, which specifically allows solar energy manufacturing, so you don't even have to get into the vague concepts of what manufacturing is, or it's allowed under 48 Section 3. If you don't want to jump to the conclusion that it's allowable as manufacturing under Osgood, but you decide that it's not industrial, then it has to be allowed under 48 Section 3, because that's what the Attorney General warned about doing. Those are the two most important issues to me. Okay?
Final answer.
Thank you. Final answer. Did I win my $1 million? Can I phone a friend now?
No, you were out of lifelines.
Look, they're sleeping in Israel, so I don't think they want me calling them right now anyway.
All right, so we have various documents that have come in of record. So just a couple of clarifications on our list. Angela,
Should we motion to close the public hearing? Are we into deliberations?
I'm going to motion, in 1 second, I just want to, as to the public hearing, I just want to make some change, the Scribner's errors with respect to our list. So the warrants, they're actually the certified bylaws that came in from the town clerk on our list. We're going to make those changes. And that, hello,
Did you close?
not yet.
No.
Can I just answer one of your questions real quick that Dan brought to my attention?
Can I just finish what I'm doing? And then, with respect to the smart overlay growth map, that's also certified from the town clerk's office. Even though whoever the author was, it came from the clerk.
Do you want me to add that?
No, I just want to make those corrections on the document list. There's, and the other stuff that came in. Yeah.
The reason when it was distinguished and it was separately put in as a special permit, I'm told, is that at the time they were drafting and debating, wind is not covered under 48 Section 3. So they had to specifically specify whether wind was or was not allowed, and they put it in under a special permit because of the visual intrusiveness of the wind, but they didn't have to do it for solar because under solar, it's allowed under 48 Section 3. Wind is not. Okay? All right, thank you. You're welcome.
We certainly did contemplate larger solar projects there because I'd already been building the previous ones that were on the site. So it was absolutely discussed and considered at the time that there would be these types of projects on there with the community development director at the time.
Thank you.
It was Mr. Bellavance. Okay, so with that being said, I think that I would make sense to hear a motion to close the public hearing, and then we can move on to deliberations.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second that motion.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor to close the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye. I'll declare that unanimously closed. Okay, on to deliberations. Are there any further deliberations on presentations that we've heard?
I'll just mention, I guess, my interpretation of the idea of the entire parcel, collection of parcels being determined as single site or many sites, and I kind of look to my experience in how planners, architects, urban designers kind of approach similar projects or planning scopes of work that take on a kind of entity of this size. And if you're looking at how an urban designer kind of characterizes a site, it might consist of an area that is several parcels. If, on the flip side, you could have a single parcel that I've worked on be broken into 15 different building sites, be it campus planning, institutional type projects. So I'm not sure how all that is relevant exactly to this site, but that's kind of my that's the kind of background that I'm bringing to the table with, I definitely can see how multiple sites could exist here. And
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can too. I mean, not only from the plain meaning of the bylaw, but, given the totality and the size and the total ability that they've had to choose from different users. I don't think that an overlay district was intended to be the predominant thrust and take over and take away the underlying zoning district. Because if that were the case, they would have just changed the underlying zoning district. There was an incentive. It was called smart growth. I mean, that was the point. That's what it was sold as. That's what the town bought, and that's what the developer has there. And whether it's this developer or another developer, until the by an act of town meeting, which would be the legislative body for the town, changes it, that's what they have. So then the question is, what did they intend? I think if they had intended to define site, it would have been defined. And what they did was they created three different zoning districts, each that served a different purpose. Clearly, the residential site at the time was the big one because it reduced the number of housing units that were going to go there as far as that process went. But I'm persuaded by the evidence presented and then the lack of the evidence persuaded. I haven't heard anything with respect to the health, safety, and welfare as it relates to solar under some form of regulation, Chapter 30, Section 9. Clearly, it's an exempted use. So, I think that however this decision came to be, regardless of the intent, I think it's the wrong decision, and it sets us on a very slippery slope with respect to these exempted uses. I believe the planning board can do their job effectively, and in terms of when the use actually were to get back to them, I believe the building department could do their job effectively if and when they actually even get to at the building permit stage. There's a whole method and materials of construction and design as it relates to various structures that someone would have to go through. I mean, really what we're talking about is a use, whether it be in one bylaw or the other. To me, it's allowed in both. Arguably, whether it's allowed by special permit, even under the industrial district, I think is a stretch based on some of the cases that I've read. I still think it should be allowed by right based on what I've read. So to the extent that that's even challenged at some point, I don't know. But I'm certainly persuaded that it's a by right use. It's not listed because it doesn't have to be as it relates to Section 17 in the Osgood. So that's sort of where I am on that one.
Nothing else to add?
I mean, we've discussed it almost ad nauseum, but I keep looking at, we're in this site and this one, nice act by the applicant to put act into the 167 acre development or site, lot, parcel, project, whatever we want to call it in shorthand. It's just $1,600 Osgood. So the introduction of ACT into 1600 Osgood has, to be pejorative about it, infected the site. And I look at 1732, and it says, and again, I can be misreading. I'm always happy to be corrected because I would rather be corrected and end up right than to have somebody not correct me and end up wrong or stay wrong. As required, the second sentence is, as required by the enabling laws, the regulations for use, dimension, and all other provisions of the zoning bylaw governing the underlying zoning districts shall remain in full force and effect, except for those sites undergoing development pursuant to this Section 17. Within the boundary, boy, I blew it on that one. Within the boundaries of the Osgood, a developer may elect to either develop a site, and all other provisions, so I was making my point, I'm sorry. The first two sentences, or the second sentence at a minimum, says that I-2 is standing tall. So unless and until someone says, I want Osgood, I-2 stands tall. So the 70 whatever permits that Councilor Rosen was pointing out makes perfect sense. It feels to me perfectly consistent. I-2 is standing, applications were made under I-2, but then the day came that somebody said, I want Osgood. And I know that a lot of people think it's absurd that this one nice act by the applicant is bringing Osgood down. The applicant wanted Osgood at 1600 Osgood. And the applicant chose Osgood, maybe accidentally, maybe purposefully.
We don't know.
We don't know. We don't know.
Town meeting adopted.
An overt act was made to trigger, my argument would be, an overt act was made to trigger Osgood, whether it was an intentional or not. The applicant is not unsophisticated. The applicant the applicant knows this statute. So the applicant knows that there's a selection being made somewhere along the line.
I don't even think our planning staff knows this statute, because if that were the case, we would have been copied like we were supposed to be under the other section of the bylaw, and we never were. It's a very complicated bylaw.
I don't disagree, and I can get shot from a million different directions on this next one. I've been involved with development in dozens of cities and towns in the Commonwealth and in Rhode Island, which is where I'm from. I have been in front of the boards, talked to the planning folks, talked to the zoning folks, and I got news for you. The developers team is almost always more sophisticated and more competent's not the right word. The applicant ordinarily knows the law better than the town. And whomever is watching on TV or whomever hears my words can be offended by that if you're working for the town. But the unfortunate reality is towns tend to be outgunned by developers.
That's not what we're making the decision.
That's not where we're making the decision.
We're
But what
making
I'm
the decision
saying is
based
that
on the
you
law.
were making the argument that the town doesn't even know the bylaw. And I'm saying that the applicant likely knows it better. In my experience, almost universally, the applicant knows this stuff better than the town.
We can't take that into evidence. That's not.
It was the argument that you were making, Al. I was countering it, that's
I
all.
was just providing what you were saying, that our own town, if I were to buy into your argument, our own town didn't follow the procedures with respect to that, because nobody ever got copied, the other boards didn't get copied, or at least the zoning board didn't.
Understood.
And there's no evidence in the record to suggest that that's the case. In fact, there's no evidence in the record to suggest anything with respect to the town's position as to election of this bylaw or interpretation, other than one letter filed by a building inspector. There's nothing else really that's come into the record.
But what has come into the record is
I specifically asked the
something
questions.
outside of I-2.
I asked the question. I asked the building inspector as part of this hearing, was there ever an express election or otherwise? Please respond and let us know for evidentiary purposes. Please let us know. Nothing's come in. Because I don't believe that was ever the case. I don't believe that was ever the intent back in 2007. I think what's happened here is, people have changed. The people that put this bylaw together and that was working, we have a different town manager, we have a different CD director, we have different planners. Staff positions have changed, and so maybe interpretations have changed in terms of how these things go. But my recollection was that, and I think the lack of evidence shows that it's a really unsupported position that they've taken with respect to this developer. That's what I think. And I don't. It was just. And I actually believe that, an affirmative vote from this board, keeping us out of harm's way with respect to the law and with respect to the statutory exemptions, will actually be a good decision for the town, because there's not likely to be a direct appellate review with respect to us, but more importantly, it gets the developer and the planning department and the building inspector back on track in terms of their roles and working out the rest of the plan review process, which is what they ought to be doing. And I think that's a good resource It's the way town resources should be spent. You know, not fighting over, you know, statutory allowed use. You know, it's the way I see it.
Or fighting over use that's not statutorily allowed, depending on one's point of view, Al.
Well, 48, Section 3 is pretty clear. I mean, the cases are pretty clear. It's exempted. You know, it's otherwise prohibited if it's only in one spot that you can't get a permit. The Attorney General's notes to the town on the bylaw back in 2007 are pretty clear. You better be careful what you're regulating. You know, they have a whole list under 48, Section 3, agriculture, educational, solar. There's a number of provisions on solar. Section 9. You know, there's enough.
It's not necessarily the end of the story. I mean, yes, for a period of time, if, depending on the way this board goes, if this board goes to support the building inspector's letter and his determinations and give deference to his readings the same way that an appellate review will give deference to ours unless there's clear error, which I'm struggling to find with Jerry's, just because we are in violation of the very warning that the Attorney General has allowed, doesn't mean that the town can't cure the problem. All you got to do is write another bylaw, get it in front of town meeting, and we'll have, there will be a place for solar. I promise all of us that will be cured.
The I-2 that was adopted, if you follow the tall order of I-2, right, that's adopted, it's allowed, says it's allowed by special permit, but it's allowed. They can't prohibit it under 40R because it's exempt. You can't say they can't do it. They can regulate the structures, they can maybe regulate the dimensions, they can maybe regulate the placements, they can require plans and so forth, but all we're really arguing about and deliberating on is the use. So, to me, it's, you know, I'm not prepared to open this up for some kind of direct appellate review. I think it's better to let the planners work on the plan, give them the tools, and let them get back to it. That's the way I see it.
Me, let the planners do their job. I'm in total agreement with you. It's their job, not ours.
Yeah.
Let's advance it so they can do what they get paid for. End of story.
Other comments? All right, well, listen, maybe, you know, so, you know, I mean, I think we should just vote it, you know?
Sure.
You know, let's just, 9:25, I mean, unless there's something to exhaust, I say we just vote the matter and...
I can't imagine there's any new ground to cover, Mr. Chair.
No. There's still a ball game on.
It's not over yet.
Well, in that case, I'll make a motion to find that I'll make a, sorry.
Do you want to take a vote on those 5 findings, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah. Well, I think he's going to move, it. We typically move in the affirmative.
Oh, okay.
We always move in the affirmative. So I think what this gentleman's going to do is just that. So I think this is based on the record.
So,
You'd move to find for the applicant as to findings 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to be more particularly described
yeah.
in the
okay.
ZBA decision and finding.
So based on the record, I'll move the ZBA to find that the applicant, as to the findings 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, to be more particularly described in the ZBA written decision, and finding along with any and all conditions or limiting language contained therein, signed by the chairman on behalf of the ZBA.
Right, you're moving to approve
And we're moving to approve
findings
this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Okay, so then I'll start with Mr. Kusia. Mr. Kusia,
Yes.
you in favor of that?
Yes.
Yes.
You're in favor of that, okay. I am also in favor of that. Sorry, I have to skip you.
It happens.
Paul, are you in favor of that?
Pardon
Are
me?
you in favor?
Oh, no, sir.
Yes. You're in favor. Okay. You need 4 votes for those to pass. I will declare all of the findings approved, and we will issue a decision within 14 days.
Thank you very much. Everybody, honestly, it was should teach a law school class one day. Let's guest lecture, because this is, again, it's not black and white, and I appreciate the effort in coming out for a special meeting. The applicant appreciates it. I know the planning board is going to appreciate it because they didn't want to reconvene again next week, and I am glad that hopefully we can get this project moving, generate some revenue, and hopefully we'll be back in here in a year talking about the next permit at the project with some favorable results. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Tom.
Much for your trip down here. Thank you. I really appreciate, everybody showing up tonight.
Yeah, New Hampshire.
All right, I'll hear a motion to close.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.